the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Monday morning. Well, it's already early afternoon here in Puerto Rico. Hope everybody's having a great start for the week and looking forward to a phenomenal week. All right, we're going to jump right in. This morning we found out that, or I guess over the weekend we found out that more of these UFOs have been shot down over the United States and Canada. Very little information about what they are, balloons, drones, what exactly these things are. Two of them were 20,000 feet above ground, so in the area where commercial airlines operate, so they were deemed a risk to commercial airlines. The fourth one, I'm not sure, I think was in higher altitude. China's, of course, come out and said that the United States operates balloons over Chinese territory, and the Americans have come out and denied that. And I mean, the whole thing is a little comical. It turns out that these UFOs have been traveling over the United States for a long time, and during the Trump administration, there were a number of these balloons and other things that traveled, but that the military did not discover that until after the fact. The reason these three additional UFOs were discovered and shot down was because the U.S. has increased the sensitivity of its radar, so now they can get smaller objects and objects, I guess, that like balloons that are not obviously detectable by radar, I guess, and at altitudes that I think the radar doesn't bother to look at. So increased sensitivity has discovered that there are a lot more of them. It turns out that China has a massive surveillance program that uses these kind of, I guess, balloons or whatever they turn out to be, drones, self-propelled something, is part of their general spying on the rest of the world, signal intelligence, spying on our phone calls. I'm sure they're listening into this YouTube channel, although that they can get publicly, so maybe why waste? Anyway, maybe some cameras. Who knows what's on these things? But a bunch of, I assume, surveillance, different types of surveillance. The other, I think, possibility is that some of these UFOs are meant to test U.S. detection capabilities, test U.S. missile or laser, whatever capabilities. If maybe one of these little things can get in and is not seen by lasers, then by radar, then maybe in a war situation, a drone could be flown in with a missile or something else that might evade the radar. So I guess the Chinese are now getting the signal that if the U.S. sets its equipment to the right level of sensitivity, then all of these things can and will be detected, and that is a lesson learned for the Chinese. This is ongoing game of espionage that is happening. I mean, the U.S. basically spies on everybody. We know that. We know they spy on the U.S. spies. We spy on our allies. We spy on our friends. Or was it the NSA at some point was listening to Angela Merkel's cell phone conversations? We have a wide array of satellites and very sophisticated satellites that can pick up all kinds of information from all kinds of places around the world. Who knows what else we have? I don't know if the U.S. uses balloons. I'm sure it uses drones and all kinds of surveillance drones. Obviously, it has used in the past all kinds of surveillance airplanes, AWACSs, and so on, all over the world. I mean, I don't know that there's an area of the world in which the United States does not actively spy on in one way or another. And the same, I'm sure, is true of China, and I'm sure that Russia aspires the same thing, although I think Russia doesn't have the capabilities and doesn't have the budget and doesn't have the ability to do it. So I mean, this is a lot of hot air balloons, something like that. I mean, again, this is all a consequence of the fact that our government keeps so many secrets from us. But the fact that the Chinese spy on us should not be a secret to anybody, should not be a surprise to anybody. The fact that they spy on us in a variety of different ways, using a variety of different techniques, should not be a surprise to anybody. So, you know, it is what it is. The real danger, I think, is, and this is something I think we need to be aware of and conscious of and follow, is the real risk of escalation between the United States and China, where neither party really means to escalate. That is, kind of escalation out of default, or escalation out of fear, or escalation really without the real intent and without any kind of thoughtful intent. You can see already the rhetoric in the U.S. about the Chinese and what the Chinese are doing, and the rhetoric in China is probably even worse, vis-a-vis what the Americans are doing and what they deserve and what they don't deserve, and their fault is this and that. This does not help, and indeed, it only intensifies the potential for conflict. It intensifies the potential for each country to make mistakes and to treat each other as enemies where it is not necessary for China and the United States to be enemies. Now, one could argue that as China becomes more authoritarian, it will become more and more of an enemy of the United States, but there's no reason to accelerate that trend. There's no reason to encourage that trend. Particularly, there's no urgency to it. The United States needs time to diversify its supply chains before it elevates China to the level of enemy. So I think calm heads need a rule, and with this, like most of these foreign policy issues, people jump to I think conclusions and jump to statements that are just irresponsible, particularly when you take into account the context. The context is the U.S. and China spy on each other constantly in many ways that you probably know of, and in many ways you probably don't know of. And just discovering one new way that the spying is going on means very little. I don't think the United States benefits right now from a cold, or certainly not from a hot war with China. The United States needs to be on alert. It needs to be ready for example, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan or something like that. The United States certainly it needs to be bolstering its military and its intelligence capabilities in anticipation of conflict in the future, given the direction China is heading. But there's absolutely zero reason to use rhetoric or anything else that accelerates, without compromising anything, just accelerates the likelihood of conflict. It's a sign of weakness, and it is completely unnecessary. Whoever happens to be in the White House at every given point in time. All right, a quick domestic story. The Republicans are really, really committed to investigating Hunter Biden and investigating the Biden family and corruption and what went on in the laptop and Hunter Biden's dealings in Ukraine and Hunter Biden's dealings in China, and the extent to which this is linked to Joe Biden and so on. And Republicans want to expend significant political capital and political interest and political time on the Hunter Biden story. And what has happened is people have started asking, well, if we're going to go after Hunter Biden, and if you remember, I actually asked this question. I brought this up, almost a year ago, 9 months ago, when the story first broke. If you're going to investigate Hunter Biden, shouldn't you also be investigating Kushner and the Trump family and the clear benefits the Trump family have gained because of because of the situation in any benefits the Trump family has received, in particular from the Saudi royal family, in particular from the Saudi investment fund, and in particular Kushner's new private equity fund. Kushner, who has no expertise in private equity, has no experience in private equity, suddenly is raising a $4 billion private equity fund, and suddenly, in spite of documented reservations among the investment advisors for the Saudi investment fund is putting in $2 billion. No accident, the Saudi investment fund is run by, the head of it is, what is he called? Soleimani, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, somebody who had extensive relationship with Kushner and Trump, particularly Kushner. The Saudis got all kinds of favorable treatment from the Trump administration. Is there quid pro quo here? Did the Trump administration treat the Saudis in a particular positive way and then get $2 billion in the investment fund? Who knows? There are other examples of the kind of the Trump businesses benefiting somehow from the Saudis. To what extent is that motivated by a deal that was cut while he was president? I mean, once you're opening up the corruption, the lid off of the corruption, what is it? I'm not sure what the metaphor is. Anyway, once you start down the road of corruption, why are we going to stop and only do Hunter Biden? Let's do Kushner. And there's no question there's corruption. There's no question Kushner could raise $2 billion from the Saudis just on his own merits. Is this got to do with the fact that the Saudis killed that journalist in the Turkish embassy? Remember, they hacked him to bits, all at basically at the request of the Saudi crown prince. And the United States did nothing, and the United States didn't comment on it and didn't really do anything. Is that silence? Anyway, what is Kushner getting out of this, and or what did Kushner get, and what did the Saudis get, and what's the trade-off here? Once you go down the politicians are corrupt path, there were a lot of politicians going to fall. A lot of politicians are going to fall, and nobody's immune, not Democrats, not Republicans. This idea that the Bidens are corrupt, but the Trumps are not, is ludicrous and ridiculous. They were all corrupt. So beware of what you ask for, Republicans. Republicans have actually said that they will investigate Kushner as part of this new committee that's investigating fraud and is involved with the Hunter Biden thing. They will also investigate the Kushners. So we will see. We will see. Maybe it'll actually happen. All right. Couple of quick stories and just to remind you, you can ask questions on the super chat. $20 get priority. $20 questions get priority. We usually have a target of $250 a show. For the new shows, we're currently at about $50, so we've got 200 to go. You can ask questions from anywhere from $500 down to $2. Please use the super chat feature both to support the show if you get value from the show and to ask a question. All right, let's see, government spending. Couple of stories related to government spending. First, this relates to interest rates. And the government debt, as you know, the government issues bonds, and it pays interest on those bonds. And as the government increases deficits, as deficits become permanent in American budgets, those deficits are funded by issuing bonds. Bonds are basically IOUs. The government, you buy a bond from the government, and then the government has to pay you back. The government sells you the bond and uses the money it receives as proceeds from the bonds to spend, right? It goes out that way. It's being spent. But then, as you hold the bonds, you have to pay an interest. You have to pay interest to the people holding those bonds, right? The government has to pay an interest to the people holding the bonds. As interest rates have gone up because of inflation and because of Fed policy, as interest rates have gone up, what has happened? as interest rates have gone up, the cost of this debt has gone up. And the cost for the government on sustaining these deficits and allowing these deficits to grow and on funding these deficits has gone up dramatically. So the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury's spending on interest payments on the debt was $261 billion. $261 billion in the first 4 months of this fiscal year. $261 billion in just 4 months. Multiply that by 3 so you get an annual rate. That is a 33% increase from the $196 billion spent in the same period last year. So as interest rates go up, the deficit goes up because the government has to spend more and more and more and more money servicing the debt. It has to pay higher and higher interest rates on the bonds that it is selling. And what's interesting and has always surprised me is that even in an era where interest rates were very close to zero, the government wasn't funding the debt with 10, 20, 30-year bonds, which then don't reprice for another 10, 20, 30-year bonds. But they were funding most of the debt with 1 6-month, 1 year, 2 year, 5-year bonds. Now, the problem with those bonds is you have to pay them back every year. Let's say a 1-year bond, you have to pay it back every year. So every year you have to issue new bonds to pay back the old bonds. And every year you issue the new bonds in a rising interest rate environment. Every year the bonds that you're issuing, you have to pay a higher interest rate than the bonds that you're paying out, that you're in a sense buying back, paying off. And that means this budget just grows and grows and grows and grows. And they could have dealt with that by issuing long-term bonds and funding the government with long-term bonds. The British government has done that for a long, long time, and it doesn't have quite as bad of a problem as we have. So the government deficits are continuing to rise. They're close to records. So in the first 4 months of this fiscal year, the deficit widened to $460 billion. That's up 78% from $259 billion in the same 4 months of last fiscal year. So of the $460 billion, right, $460 billion, 261 was just the interest on the debt. So it's just, I mean, something has to give here. Something has to give. Interest rates could come back down to zero, but it's unlikely anytime soon. In the meantime, deficits are going to go through the roof. What Republicans are trying, at least they say they're trying, without touching Social Security and Medicare, is to get a deal to cut spending. But we know that government almost never actually cuts spending. Almost never. So we have set ourselves into this treadmill of ever-growing deficits, and there's no end to it in sight. One other aspect to this government spending with no end to it in sight, the Biden administration is about to submit to Congress the largest Pentagon, the largest defense budget in history. Who said Democrats don't spend on defense? So as everybody's fighting over how to cut spending and how to raise the debt limits and what can be done, the Pentagon is not only funding all the weapon systems for Ukraine, but is ramping up to challenge China, is ramping up operations all over the world. So instead of figuring out how to be more efficient, instead of figuring out how to be more productive, instead of, what did I say the other day, having a strategy and figuring out what weapon systems were actually necessary in order to execute on that strategy, the Pentagon and our politicians are going to go to the tried old method of just let's spend ourselves into, let's just spend and spend and spend and spend. The amazing thing is the United States today spends between 3 to 4 times more, 3 to 4 times more than the Chinese do on defense. Indeed, I think you have to take all the next 10 countries combined in terms of the dollars they spend in order to match the U.S. Budget. It's actually, I think it's much more than 10. So we spend an enormous amount of money on defense. And yet on key areas, we seem to be falling behind the Chinese. Certainly not the Russians we see, but the Chinese. Maybe it's more about reforming. Maybe it's more about focusing. Maybe it's more about improving the way in which we spend, not just throwing money at everything, which seems to be the way the Pentagon functions. So we're about to get the largest Pentagon budget in history. We'll see how Republicans respond to that. Republicans usually like spending on defense, but yet they are pretending to be, deficit hawks. We'll see how they square that circle. I'm using a lot of metaphors today. Bizarre. All right. Last story. We'll do this quick, and maybe today will be a shorter show. That's fine. We've talked about the Adani Group, this group of companies, industrial companies in India, one of the largest conglomerates in India. It is, there was a report by a hedge fund that specializes in shorting companies that claimed that much of its stock price was manipulated through fraud and through stock manipulation, and there was no justification for the value of the Adani Group. As a consequence, over the last couple of weeks, the Adani Group has lost a massive amount, well over $120 billion. I think they were continuing to decline. Today, the Adani, who is the head of the group, it was one of the richest people in the world, has lost a fortune, tens of billions of dollars of his wealth over a relatively short period of time. And one of the interesting aspects of this is when the story first broke, given how big the Adani Group is, given how dominant it is within the Indian economy, and given the close relationship between Adani and the current Indian government, and there's a lot of cronyism in India, and Adani Group is certainly part of the whole crony system in India. Given the relationship between Adani Group and Modi, the Prime Minister of India, there was real fear that this would have horrific consequences for the Indian economy, for the Indian stock market, and that you would see declines in other stocks, you would see declines in economic activity, that you would see an economic crisis, maybe a political crisis in India, and so on. And what is, this is at a time when India has been growing economically very, very fast. Indeed, it just overtook the UK to become the 5th largest economy in the world. It has, I think it's already overtaken China, although there's some debate on whether this has happened already or if it's going to happen very, very soon. It's already taken over China as having the largest population in the world. So we have the largest country in the world with the 5th largest economy in the world, having one of its largest conglomerates really collapse and be accused of fraud, and again, a conglomerate very, very closely aligned with the ruling party and Modi. And yet, the Indian economy is doing okay. The Indian stock market is, holding up. It has not suffered the kind of declines that was expected. India is now, India today has about 1.5 million companies. It has a very well capitalized stock market. It has between $3 to $3.5 trillion worth of, the market value of those stocks. The Indian economy, it appears, has matured. It has matured to a level where it is not being impacted by accusations and problems with one company, even as big a company as Adani is. The Indian economy still seems to be growing and to be one of the more dynamic economies in the world out there. And this is crucial because as companies look to divest supply chains out of China, one of the leading candidates in which to divest to is India. India has a vast population of well-educated engineers. It has a whole network of engineering schools that are some of the best in the world. and they have a massive population, of which significant numbers and growing numbers are well educated. So there's a massive potential to move a lot of production, a lot of innovation, a lot of sophisticated production that requires engineering talent to India, and the resilience of the Indian economy is an important aspect of that, and something that I think that most companies are looking at when deciding whether to move operations to India or not. So India is holding up. That is a good sign. India is a democracy. It's a democracy ruled right now by a relatively nationalistic political party with a relatively nationalistic prime minister, and a very crony driven economy. But you can say that about a lot of countries in the world. It certainly does not have the same problems as China does. It does not pose a national security risk to the United States. It is not threatening any islands close by to it with invasion. It is not. It does not have the kind of military the Chinese have. It does not have nuclear weapons targeted at the U.S. India's nuclear weapons are primarily targeted at Pakistan, although some might be targeted at China just in case. It actually has a border dispute with China, which places it in a potential situation where it could be allied with the United States in a conflict against China. But it has become much more friendly with Putin, I think primarily because of Modi's relative nationalist tendencies and their unwillingness to kind of commit themselves to the West. But I don't think that is a long-term or strategic commitment. I think India could easily be swayed to become a much closer ally of the United States. I think India has been troubled by the fact that the U.S. has provided Pakistan with weapon systems and helped the Pakistanis since 9/11. It's ridiculous and absurd, but India considers Pakistan a potential and real enemy, and a friendly relation between the United States and Pakistan doesn't help relations between the U.S. and India. But I think that's changing, and there's a real opportunity for strategic engagement with Pakistan. Again, you need a strategy in order to do that, but both in terms of trade and in terms of security, I think such a relationship would be good. All right, let's see. All right, I think that's my coverage. I'm open now to Super Chat questions. We are like 176 short of our goal of 250. I'm really hoping that we can get back on track and getting to our goal on the morning shows. Otherwise, I'll have to reconsider them. It is important trajectory for the trajectory of the show that we start making our numbers. And 250 was the number that seemed appropriate for a 40 to 60 minute shows on every day during the week. All right, let's see. We do have 102 people watching right now, so $2 a person would cover it like that. All right. Hiram has a question. Someone that wants to Jewish reality bad, uses old stories about UFO. I don't know what the Jewish thing is. Someone that wants to something really bad, uses old stories about UFOs to help with do-it-yourself tricks. I have direct knowledge of this because I'm the individual doing it. Ever wonder why all the super chats are multiples of 6.13? Is this something about Major Taylor Greene and her Jewish UFO laser stories? I can't even remember what the lasers were supposed to do. Maybe it's all part of the Jewish conspiracy to try to take over the world. Isn't it amazing how prominent Marjorie Taylor Greene has become within the Republican Party? Here's a complete and utter kook, a complete kook. Somebody who believes in conspiracy theories, a part of QAnon, had the whole Jewish laser thing going, and everybody considered her a kook. I mean, even Republicans considered her a kook when she was elected. She was an embarrassment. And now in spite of that embarrassment, she is now like sitting in committees. She is now engaged. She's now the biggest ally that McCarthy has. And she's like a spokesman. She heckles Biden during the State of the Union address. I mean, she is now a senior member of the Republican Party. This is the Republican Party that you guys adore. It has Marjorie Taylor Greene as a senior member of it. How pathetic is that? I mean, we made fun of AOC for a long time. I should do some Marjorie Taylor Greene bits to kind of balance it all out, because she is more wacky than AOC. Certainly more nuts than AOC, and stupider too. Adam, our politicians waste our current production, yes. Our current production, which is what we create today, and future production, yes, what we're going to create in the future, and then give self-righteous lectures about the evils of successful business people. Yes, they waste our current production sounds too amorphous, and a little what's our, who's our. Some people don't produce anything. Our politicians waste our successful business people's production. They waste almost the members, those members of our society who are most productive. They waste their production, and the future production of the most productive people in the future, in bizarre, ridiculous, crazy ways that ultimately hurt more than they benefit. They don't benefit anybody, right? And they attack the people who they take the money from, but that's always the case. Yeah, I've complimented AOC because AOC is smart. She is smart, and she knows how to manipulate morality to get people to support her cause. Marjorie Taylor Greene is nuts. That's all she is. She's just nuts, and she has nothing positive going for her. But remember that I complimented her while saying her ideas were evil and wrong. Evil and wrong. All right, Shahzad says, why is nobody suggesting that the U.S. adopt socialized food similar to the push for socialized medicine? Because food is kind of always been privatized. It's always been private farms, and I mean, it's other than in feudal times, and even feudal times, the state didn't own it. So people are accustomed, used to, have internalized the idea of food being private, and they can't conceive of anything else. And indeed, the only example they have is very, very concrete, and that is the socialization of food in the Soviet Union, the socialization of food in Venezuela, the socialization of food in socialist countries, and what you get is starvation. Healthcare is new. Healthcare is something that was created by capitalism, by the marketplace, by science, by technology. There's no context. We don't quite hold it as something that is produced by private enterprise. Healthcare is also something that has been partially, or to a large extent, socialized almost from the beginning. I mean, the U.S. has had the government dabbling in healthcare since at least World War II, and has basically socialized a big portion of healthcare, more than half really, starting in the 1960s with Medicare and Medicaid. So the reality is that people just associate healthcare with just a service that is delivered. They can't relate to it. They can't relate to people who really do it. It's just a service provided by something over there, and where the government has been involved forever. And of course, other countries have it socialized, so why shouldn't we? And it seems to work in these other countries where it's been socialized, whereas food, clearly, unequivocally, wherever it was socialized, was a clear, unequivocal failure by their measure. That is, people starved. The deaths of people from healthcare is hidden. It's unseen. The starvation is seen. So this is what Ayn Rand called a concrete bound mentality. This is the mentality of people can only deal with concretes. They can only deal with the seen, the observable right directly in their face. In their face. And that is why. By the way, you laugh at socialized food, but to some extent, we have socialized food. I mean, the U.S. government spends, what, $60 billion, is it a year or 5 year, on food subsidies, on this is just the farm bills, on paying farmers not to farm some stuff and to farm other stuff and to grow this stuff and not to grow that stuff. And a big chunk of it goes to dairy farmers in the United States, and we have tariffs to protect ourselves of evil, really, really harmful Canadians who produce milk and cheese. We don't want Canadian milk and cheese. That might cause a problem in Wisconsin. And, you know, and there's a national security, real national security risk if we don't actually produce all the milk that we consume. So we can't have Canadians importing milk into the United States, God forbid. So we already have, to some extent, socialized food. We have a food pyramid. We tell people what they should eat. We encourage obesity. I mean, there's massive food socialism in the country, just not quite as much, because once we collectivize the farms, people realize it's better. What we have is food fascism. We have socialized medicine and food fascism, where the government dictates what you should and shouldn't produce and protects the U.S. farmers from competition from abroad. It's why, yeah, I'll mention this. Colleen, thank you. Colleen says, I love these shows, $100. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Colleen. So we're only $5 short now. I will mention that yesterday on the members only show, which I really enjoyed yesterday, I delivered, I think it was about 30 minutes, State of the Union speech. If I were president, what would I do? What would be my priorities if I were president? I thought it was quite good. I'm hoping some of you who are members who weren't there live go to the member section of the channel and go watch it. I think you'll really enjoy it. I think you'll find it entertaining and interesting and maybe a little inspiring. I hope that those of you who are not yet members become members, and then you can go to the member section and watch it. At some point, we will make it available, at least for a little period of time, for non-members to listen as well. Maybe we'll just clip the part of my, what do you call it, State of the Union address. I do think it was good. Why not put it out there? I doubt it would go viral, but maybe people would be inspired by it. Hard to tell. So we are working on that, but there are a lot of you here on the chat who are not yet members. Again, membership is not that expensive. And you can join, and you can participate in some of these. On my website, it was live on my website for non-members. I don't have a website, so which website? I mean, my regular website. You know what? I think by accident I streamed it on Facebook and Twitter for non-members. So anyway. Become members, and you can participate live, and you can get these first. And in the future, I won't stream it to Facebook and Twitter. So my mistake. All right, Adam says, hope the aliens are objectivists, or at least maybe they can show the world that religion are BS. Yeah, I mean, I think finding aliens would be pretty cool. Yeah, and they're more advanced than us. They have a lot to teach us, both philosophically and technologically. Maybe they could cure aging. Daniel says, imagine if you first favor of the State of the Union address was actually pulled off. How exciting would that? Oh, imagine if the first phase of the State of the Union that I proposed was pulled off. Yes, imagine if just a fraction of what I suggested in the State of the Union would be pulled off, how exciting that would be. I mean, this is why you should all listen to my State of the Union, because I thought it was really cool. Frank says, isn't State of the Union like a car with check engine light on? No, I think it's much worse than that. The engine is sputtering. There's smoke coming out of the engine. You've got one or two flat tires. You can still move forward, but very, very cautiously. And obviously, the engine seems to about ready to die. It's just a question of when. Mr. Muffin, what are we in war indirectly with China and Russia? Is that the fact that that they are dictators and we think they will use weapons against us? So I think we're at war, in a sense, we're in a proxy war with Russia, primarily because it is an aggressor, and it is aggressed against a friendly country. It is against a country that was moving towards freedom, was moving to become part of Europe. I think this is a European war. I'm not sure the United States should be that involved, but it is a member of NATO, so it is involved by default. But this really should be something Europe should be engaged with and should be a lot more aggressively engaged with, because Russia poses a real threat to Europe. And as long as we're guaranteeing the security of Europe through NATO, we're at war, we're indirectly at war with Russia. With China, I don't think we're at war. I don't even think we need to be in a Cold War with China. But I think we're heading in that direction because the people running our foreign policy and the people in Congress are not adults. And to some extent, they think a Cold War is a good idea. They think a Cold War will bring America together, that it'll inspire patriotism, that it should be, that it's a good, positive thing. So, I think there's a real eagerness among Republicans and Democrats in Congress to be in a Cold War with China. And I think that's a mistake. I don't think we need there. I think we need to be cautious of China. I think we need to prepare for war with China, just in case. I think we need to diversify supply chains out of China. But I do not think we should encourage getting into a cold and certainly not a hot war with China. Again, China has a lot of nukes. It has weapon systems we're going to have a hard time dealing with. There'll be a lot of casualties on both sides. I think the U.S. beats China even without nukes, even a conventional war. But wars are horrible and to be avoided if one, particularly wars with countries with the kind of weapon systems China has. So, and the other thing about, just relating to your question about dictators, is authoritarian regimes ultimately move towards conflict because they can't sustain themselves eternally. A big reason why Putin invaded Ukraine was because he needed a diversion from the fact that he was getting weaker and weaker internally. It was a way to bolster the regime, his personal fiefdom. And there's a risk that China, as it becomes more and more authoritarian, will move in the same direction. It will need an external threat in order to mitigate the unrest internally. All right, Colleen, last question. I think the first and easiest thing to do as president is to tax religions. I know you talked about corporate tax. Yeah, it would be pretty easy, and if one considers equality before the law, I'm not sure why religions are taxed. If I were to reform the tax code, one of the first things I would do is take away all tax deductions to charities and religions. That would solve a big part of the problem. But the key is to reduce corporate taxes to zero, which would reduce the tax, which would create everybody would be a nonprofit in that sense. Okay, thanks everybody. Really appreciate it. I will see you all tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow evening there'll be a show at 7 p.m. East Coast time. Or maybe it'll be earlier because it's Valentine's Day. I want to try to get you before you go out to your Valentine's Day date or dinner or whatever. So we'll see what time we'll do the show tomorrow. But there will be 2 shows tomorrow. I will see you all then. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you for those super chatters. We made our target and really, really appreciate it, particularly to Colleen. Colleen, thank you.